So, hello ladies and gentlemen, I see now that my stream is live. On one device it's live, on another one it's not. I hope it's working. Regardless, I am once again leaving a small break at the beginning of a video and at the end, so as to not cut myself off, but somehow OBS still does it, even like with the go live button and stuff like that. So I hope you can hear me well, I hope you can see my stream well, and I hope you're as excited as I am about the topic we are discussing. Now, I am going to be off for a few days before WWDC, so this is probably my last video before WWDC. So I really wanted to talk about something that, beyond the headset, which is of course very exciting because always a new category regardless of how it might actually turn out, like what we've seen with the HomePod with its up and downs. Obviously a new product category is always very exciting. However, there is something that excites me more personally, and it has something to do with a product that personally I wouldn't likely even buy. But it's a product that is very important to a key Apple demographic, a product that historically has been neglected, then got some love again, then neglected again. A product that Apple themselves promised would be getting an upgrade, but that would be a story for another time. And let us speculate today if that time will be WWDC. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Mark Tech, I think I forgot to mention that, and welcome to my discussion about a potential Mac Pro announcement at this WWDC, but not just any Mac Pro, potentially a Mac Pro that has an M3 based processor. And I will give you reasons why I think that can happen, even though very few rumors and leaks are pointing towards that direction. Actually, I've planned this video yesterday, and a few hours after I've planned the stream and prepared everything from the thumbnail, etc., we got a little bit more news from Mark Gurman, and we can hardly call it news because it wasn't very precise. Oops, my mouse fell down, I'm sorry. So I just wanted to zoom in a little bit. I apologize to anybody's ears I might have heard. Get my mouse back and put my mic back in front of my face so you can hear me better. Man, technical problems, right? So, what did Mark Gurman say? Well, it wasn't actually something big and certainly nothing precise, and certainly he didn't say that we are getting an M3 Ultra Mac Pro, but he said we should expect several new Macs at the WWDC keynote next Monday. So he basically said that we would be getting three major announcement sets on Monday. First, a big part of it would be the new operating systems: macOS 14, tvOS 17, iPadOS 17, watchOS 10, iOS 17, and all of that. And of course, then there would be the Apple Reality Pro headset. We recently got some features of it leaked, like it having like 5,000 nits peak brightness and 4,000 pixels per inch pixel density. So that was quite something. But he also said that we should expect Macs. And until now, I would argue we only got solid leaks for one Mac, which would be a 15-inch MacBook Air. In fact, we've had those for a long time, as 95Mac rightfully points out. One thing that is being said is that the MacBook Air would be based on the M2 chip, though, not an M3 processor that obviously still hasn't been announced and is likely built on TSMC's 3nm, which isn't probably quite ready. So why am I so hesitant about my Mac Pro is quite understandable, isn't it? Because if we are getting a MacBook Air with an M2 chip, right? And we currently have MacBook Pros that have M2 Pros and M2 Max chips. And in fact, the Mac Studio that we currently have is still based on M1 Max and M1 Ultra chips. How can I expect an M3 processor? Well, to be quite honest, I don't expect it, but I do think it's more likely than some people are claiming it is. Now, we do know that Apple is supposedly designing a new Mac Pro, or even if they are keeping the same Mac Pro chassis, obviously there are still big changes coming, as the Mac Pro is finally transitioning from Intel and x86 processor to Apple's own silicon, which is ARM based, and in this case, or more precisely, either will be M2 generation based or M3. And they're also mentioning that, so what is left after the MacBook Air, right? We already got announcements for the Mac Mini, the MacBook Pro. Well, it leaves the Apple Silicon Mac Pro and the new version of Mac Studio, which, again, as they also say, is the Mac Studio is woefully behind, as it's still based on the M1 generation. And there are some rumors that I don't actually think matter that much, which is they're saying that they will begin accepting like Mac Studios and like other devices for their trade-in program. To be honest, that just means that Apple will have some alternative for it. Doesn't mean that they necessarily have a Mac Studio for like a next gen Mac Studio. It just means that, oh, maybe somebody from a Mac Studio just wants the highest end MacBook Air, right? So I don't think this specifically says which devices we are getting, but it was interesting to hear that we are getting definitely some updates to the trade-in program. So the thing is, the same memo says that the M2 MacBook Air and the 13-inch M2 MacBook Pro, which also somehow exists, the one with the touch bar, yeah, I always forget that that one is still in the lineup, will also be able to be added to the trade-in program. I'm sorry guys, I have no idea why I cannot speak and why I'm dropping my stuff today. I think it's the allergies. So does that mean that Apple will release M3 MacBooks, a new Mac Studio? Is the Apple Silicon Mac Pro coming? Those are all good questions. And obviously, we don't quite know. However, there is something that I would argue about. And this is, or argue for, to be more precise. And that is that an M2 MacBook Air does not prevent us from getting an M3 based Mac Pro, or at least an M2 processor that has potentially some changes in it, though I think that is very unlikely because we already have the M2 Max chip and any kind of M2 Ultra or M2 Extreme, which would be like 4 dies of M2 Max. That we would be getting a Mac Pro that is different from the M2 Max designs that we currently have. And why is that? Well, historically, whenever Apple introduces something big, and specifically even at WWDC, there usually is a larger gap between the announcement and when the product goes on sale. Obviously, Apple likes to have that period short enough to still keep the excitement of the original announcement going, but also long enough for them to build up marketing, put up ads, inform all the stores, educate their technicians on it and stuff like that. So it would, sometimes if a product is not that big of an update, it can go on sale basically the very same day as the announcement. Usually we get like a week and like a week and a half, and then like 3 days later you can do pre-orders. So there is some discrepancy. However, there are also products that are announced and then only come out 5 months later or 6 months later. And this doesn't just apply to the WWDC. Obviously, we have seen that with a lot of new product categories like the Apple Watch, the original iPhone, big redesigns, even like the new Mac Pro, or what is still the newest Mac Pro, which is the Intel Xeon one, the large one, the one that I have in my thumbnail. So why do I think that an M3 based Mac Pro could be announced at WWDC? Well, for one, if they introduce it now and prepare it for a holiday release, which could range from like November to like even like February if they really wanted to, right? Because they could like say, oh yeah, it's like winter 2023, which goes into early 2024 technically, right? And M3 chips are quite ready, 3nm chips are quite ready. They are not obviously now ready to start producing an iPhone and sell it tomorrow, but we know that yields are improving day by day, week by week, month by month. And they certainly will be good enough by November, December, January, February, even for larger processors. And we know that Apple has been quite a little behind their Apple Silicon transition promises, which they have said would last 2 years, and it's definitely longer than that by now. I'm sorry guys, my nose is closed. This is why it's so hard for me to concentrate. I should have taken some antihistamines before this. And the idea behind this, obviously the Macs, right, especially the MacBook Air, it's fine for it to still be M2 based because most people don't need that much more oomph, and the M2 MacBook Air, even the 15-inch version, would still be lower priced than like the 14-inch and the 16-inch MacBook Air. The Mac Studio can stay on its M1 chip until it eventually gets updated to the M3. I would suppose that it gets that update sometime early next year after the Mac Pro comes around, and then the Mac Studio gets those processors a little later. However, there is still the possibility that we will get M2 based Mac Pro, which obviously would throw my timeline quite, it would basically destroy it, but let's hope for the best, right? And except for having that larger time frame that Apple can work in, there's also the argument to be had that it would be good for the Apple headset development, for like as the industry jumps on 4nm chips and there's more like 3D stacking designs, that Apple Silicon isn't as far ahead as it once was. Like when Apple launched the M1, they were the only one on the market with a 5nm chip. When they launched the M1 Pro and the M1 Max, that still applied for larger processors. And even though you could argue that there are now like AMD chips and NVIDIA graphics that are on similar nodes, nothing is as well integrated into a system on a chip. For a Mac Pro desktop, that isn't as necessary. So to actually capture a performance crown, Apple would need to have quite a few tricks up its sleeve. And I would argue that, for example, adding ray tracing to the GPUs on the Mac Pro and then subsequently other MacBooks and the Mac Studio would be a big deal. Because look at Blender results. Apple, for a chip that only does rasterization, is very good positioned in Blender. But unfortunately, that is not the market they are competing against. And this is why there will be 5 or even 10 times slower than a comparable NVIDIA processor, simply because that one is both better optimized because the app came originally Windows only stuff, but also primarily because it has ray tracing cores. And Apple obviously could do ray tracing a little differently. They could do it more similarly to how AMD does it. But regardless, they need to do it in at least in some capacity, because they're definitely behind in that regard. Also, look at the upgrade from the M1 to the M2. It's a nice upgrade, sure, and going from N5 to N5P, which is like the production node it's on, did deliver a little more efficiency and stuff like that. They were able to put in now 2 extra efficiency cores into the Pro and the Max version. So an M3 chip could have like, and we have seen like some leaks that it would have like more cores, probably more efficiency cores even than the M2 version, than the M2 Pro and M2 Max version, that it would allow for more RAM, which was weird because there was like a rumor where it went from like 32 gigs of RAM to 36, which definitely isn't like a standard upgrade by any means. So, and I know I'm basically like, I'm doing a little bit of like clickbaiting, and I'm presenting something that isn't based on like hard rumors and definitely not on hard facts, right? But look at this lineup. The M1 iMac, I would argue, is a joke by this point in the lineup, because why wouldn't you just buy a MacBook Air and connect it to an external monitor? Why wouldn't you just buy an M2, potentially M2 Pro Mac Mini, and connect it to whatever display you have, and it will be way faster? Certainly with the MacBook Pros, please ignore this one on the side, there's a lot more love put in those, as they also now have like better Wi-Fi standards, and obviously like their screens are XDR displays and stuff like that. And the Mac Studio, even though it's based on the same generation of processors, at least it's much faster, and it's actually I would argue a better value with you being able to get a Max version processor for $2,000. Apple needs to change some of that. First of all, I would love a new iMac, but apparently we are only going to get one with the M3. And personally, while I am speculating about an M3 based Mac Pro, I actually don't think that the base M3 processor or the regular M3 Pro and Max will be announced at this event. I am arguing that what we will get is an M3 Ultra and potentially an M3 Extreme, and then we will have to wait 6 months until we actually get them. And by the time they are announced, we will have also the regular M3 processor, maybe even before that. So no iMac at this event. There simply aren't any rumors, and also no promises from Apple, right? And I would argue that they need to get rid of the 24-inch version, just build a 27-inch version, maybe even keep like the same price if you're keeping the same if you're keeping the same base processor variant, but then like also offer the M3 Pro and Max even inside. The larger the chassis, the better the potential cooling, and also a great opportunity to upsell people on it. Also, please introduce a version with like black bezels. Just make a space gray iMac. But it was a detour, right? We still need the large Mac Pro, the one that offers expandability, and there's a lot that a potential M3 chip could do that would be improving core aspects of Mac Pro. For example, it could use PCIe 5, right? PCIe 5 has double the bandwidth of PCIe 4, which has double the bandwidth of PCIe 3. And we do have PCIe 4 based expandability currently. Though it's obviously not in the standard way, but you can see it like in the storage speed for example, on the MacBook Pros, which goes up to 7 gigabits per second. And I would argue that even beyond storage, we just need a Mac Pro to have as many lanes as possible for potentially like server-like functionality. Even for Apple themselves, right? They offer now like coding in the cloud capabilities. There's a lot that they can make a Mac Pro do, which would be beneficial for them and for customers that are buying it. And as I've said, there are needed architectural changes to make it stand out versus the competition. If they give it like the M2 Max chip, right, with its single core performance, which has like a high performance mode, that would about break even with like some of the fastest desktop processors, especially the AMD processors would probably have still a little less single core performance than the Intel ones, or Apple could overclock it a little higher. However, that isn't how Apple does it, because a lot of like the internal components are optimized for certain clock speeds. And if you just, because this is a system on a chip, this isn't just the CPU, this isn't just the GPU. They all have to communicate with each other. And if Apple drastically starts changing clock speeds, that could create some instability for the combined cache systems, the memory system, and stuff like that. So I don't see Apple going way above the clock speeds that are currently on the M2 Max, which I believe is like 3.7 gigahertz or something like that in the performance mode on the latest MacBook Pro. So an M3 could obviously solve that, not just by being 3 nanometer, not just by being in a much larger chassis, but hopefully by also updating to a new architecture. There is, for example, now ARM v9, which, if you currently don't know, current Apple processors are based on ARM version 8.2. Now, Apple has a very customized version of the ARM instruction set. In many ways, Apple's ARM v8.2 is way better than even like ARM's latest announced ARM v9.2 in terms of like the single core performance that it reaches and stuff like that, because Apple has done a lot of stuff to like the cache, the inner die communication, and then they've also, of course, done stuff even to combine 2 dies with the Ultra chips. So there's a lot that Apple has done, even like artificial intelligence acceleration. Apple has done like stuff to accelerate AI, obviously on their neural engine, on the GPU, on the CPU, and then have like special systems that manages which part of the chip then gets that task. Can even all parts work together if a task is very well optimized. So I'm not arguing that Apple should switch to ARM version 9 simply because, like the next Snapdragon chip will be based on ARM v9.2 and will have the X4 processor or something like that. No, it's simply because there is something newer, and it's something that Apple themselves can keep building on, and I absolutely believe in their ability to keep improving on the standard instruction set that ARM is providing and to improve upon what they themselves are doing. Similarly, the neural engine. Look at the latest AI boom. Nvidia just recently became a $1 trillion company because people want AI, and Apple's neural engine is very fast. But, for example, AMD has recently said that their latest, their own system on a chip, which usually they do make chiplet stuff, but the 7040 series is actually an SoC that has its own like AI accelerator, that it is on par with the M2. Now, obviously, Apple can also build several neural engines, and we have seen them do that with like the Max chips, even have like a redundant neural engines for the depending on how they bin the chip, and obviously the Ultra chips have like double everything. But regardless, I would argue there's also a point that Apple hasn't been changing the core architecture of the neural engine that much recently. So why not go all in and have like a 2 times faster neural engine so that people can use it for on-device machine learning that actually keeps up with some dedicated graphics cards? And when we go back to the GPU, Apple has had a bigger push into gaming. And I'm not just talking about like ray tracing being needed, but also just a general push with higher GPU performance. Probably give it like, and this goes beyond like the M3 Max and M3 Ultra. Please give the base M chip a little more memory. Don't start it with 8, maybe start it with 12 and use that opportunity to give it like a 192-bit bus instead of 128, so that even like the base chip has a lot more memory to work with, a lot more bandwidth to work with, and then with some architectural changes also has a lot of compute power, something that already quite well competes even with something like the Xbox Series S. But I would argue the Xbox Series S is trash, so let us keep beating it as much as possible. There's a lot that Apple can and should do. Even just when you look at the Mac Pro itself, right? We obviously you can give it now faster PCIe, not just storage but connectivity in general. It needs newer Wi-Fi capabilities. It might have, and that is something that I just speculate on, but we know that Thunderbolt 5 is coming. If you have more internal bandwidth, why not dedicate it to external accessory support, such as Thunderbolt 5? So basically, I'm saying that the Mac Pro doesn't just need M3, it needs so many different upgrades, and a lot of them can be facilitated by the M3. And the other point I would argue is, what if Apple comes out and introduces an M2 based Mac Pro? Don't get me wrong, a lot of the updates that I mentioned are still upgrades, right? The current Mac Pro is on PCIe 3, so PCIe 4 on the M2, Max and Ultra and potentially Extreme would still be upgrades. It could still get later Wi-Fi standards and stuff like that. Hell, it might even have Thunderbolt 5 if that technology is ready. But my argument against that is it wouldn't really excite the industry, right? Unless Apple designs the M2 based Mac Pro in a way that they can like very easily slide in M3 chips. There's a possibility that they could create a generation of Mac Pro that is very underwhelming to a lot of users. A lot of people have like 16-inch MacBook Pros with the highest end M1 Max and M2 Max processors. A lot of people bought the M1 Max Mac Studio and even the M1 Ultra, which still technically is like the fastest when it comes to multi-threaded processing. And a lot of people don't really need more. But if all Apple can say is like, oh, it's double that of the MacBook, right? That would be like the Ultra chip. So what happens then with the Extreme processor? Will it scale well enough to provide 4x? How much more will it actually cost? Because yes, we can always argue that like for pros, spending money is making money and they will do everything to get their hands on a faster device. There are limits to it, especially in today's economy, especially while they're also eyeing like maybe I will need like now an extra desktop for some AI stuff. Hell, maybe my video editing is so non-demanding that my M1 Mac Studio, or especially my M1 Ultra Mac Studio, is still more than enough. So what I'm arguing is that if Apple wants to make a splash, instead of making an M2 Mac Pro that could be sold a month from now or something like that, they should get people actually excited with something very new and very powerful and very potentially versatile. I am not currently speculating on how exactly upgradability will look like. I think it will be drastically different because of Apple's SoC design and because of the compatibility of Apple's silicon with different accessories in general. However, I will speculate that obviously this device will satisfy the needs of certain pros much better than these two devices, the M2 Mac Mini and the M1 Max and M1 Ultra Max Studios. And you could double down on all of it, in my opinion, if it's not just new, if it isn't just better than the previous generation, if it isn't just more versatile than all the other Apple Silicon devices, but if it's legitimately a big generational leap for anybody who owns any single one of those, right? Even if you own an M2 Max MacBook Pro, you could get something that has like 25 or 30% higher single core performance, maybe. It could have like double the neural engine processing power, even if it's not like the highest end processor. It doesn't really matter. And it all could have like 5 to 10 times better like rendering capabilities by doubling down on ray tracing, and obviously gaming would be much better if obviously you don't buy a Mac for gaming, but you might do some gaming on the side. Who prevents you from doing that? I have emulators on my Mac, I have Apple Arcade games on my Mac, I have some smaller games from the App Store on my Mac and from the outside. I have Parallels on my Mac where I play some Windows games on it. The sky is the limit, especially with how excited people were, and in many cases still are, about the Apple Silicon transition. And since my nose is quite literally giving up on me right now, and I hope that I've put my point in front of you, and that I've made it clear why an M3 based Mac Pro would be so much more exciting than an M2 one, or not getting a Mac Pro at all, and why it's also still in line with Apple to introduce something that then only launches in like 6 or even 7-8 months. It's still a possibility, and I would argue that it would be a much better outcome for Apple and for consumers to show us something that gets us truly excited and then make us wait, instead of showing us something that is a little more than having it come out and then making us wait at least another year before upgrading it, and then we get excited again, right? So I would argue this is the best possible timeline. I would argue it's a big opportunity, as people are also going now into like VR development. Having the fastest possible device will be a big boom for that. Capitalizing a little bit on the AI boom would also be great for Apple. And an M3 will facilitate all that in a better way than the M2. And obviously when I say M3, I mean M3 Max, M3 Ultra, and potentially a 4-die based M3 Extreme, which would also come with a ton of memory potentially. But obviously, as Apple has said, that is a story for another day, and I hope that there will be WWDC. And who knows, I might be totally wrong, but as I said, this is a speculation video. Obviously, I'm not an insider, I'm not a leaker, I'm just a fan sharing my potential hopes with other fans. So I hope you like this, guys. I hope you can forgive me for being a little nasal and stuff like that. I really am looking forward to WWDC. I still don't know how I will do any live reacting to it, because obviously, knowing from one of my later streams, is that I cannot stream any Apple stuff directly. However, after that, expect a lot of coverage on like everything that was introduced, and then expect coverage based on the betas that I have installed and them testing out. I will actually put them on my primary devices. So while it is more risky, I will be testing it on pretty new devices, pretty powerful devices. So please subscribe if you're excited for any of that. Please like if you enjoyed this video. Please share it if you want others to partake in our community. Follow me on Twitter or on Mastodon. Leave constructive criticism either here or on social media. This is MarkTech. As always, a big thank you. We now have a video with almost 4,000 views. The last one hit over 100. The other one hit almost 200. I'm so grateful for any support, and I hope to continue to be able to deliver you content that you actually enjoy, and hope to double down and triple down on it next week. So this is MarkTech tuning out, but hopefully seeing you very soon. Thank you, guys.